Well, welcome indeed to this talk. It's Monday, the 11th of January. Now, what we've been worried about since the start of this pandemic is that the number of people getting sick all at the same time would exceed the ability of health services to look after them, and therefore people would be suffering and dying unnecessarily through lack of healthcare provision. Now, I'm not saying we're there yet, but there is a real risk of this in the next few weeks. Now, let me give you the evidence for this. So here we see data from the United Kingdom. And we see this is by cases by date reported. We see this dramatic increase in cases, quite significant, obvious increase. And if we compare that to the CDC data from the United States, it's a very similar pattern. Now, there's more delay in the US data, so this is going to carry on going up. So we do see that the two nations are actually in a fairly similar position. The UK perhaps a bit ahead of the United States in terms of infections per capita now. So United Kingdom, United States, United Kingdom. So quite a lot of analogies between the two countries here at the moment. Now, just to say why this is a problem, this is the cases in the UK, and the problem is we know this feeds through into hospitalizations. We see the dramatic increase in daily cases and the cumulative number of patients in hospital, which is not sustainable. And we see that also in deaths, deaths increasing also. So that's sort of the problem. But of course, because the cases are increasing, we have this 13-day delay. So what I've done is I've just sketched out a sort of a bit of an explainer of this. I hope this makes sense. So this is the new infections here. And this is the hospitalizations. Now, people are typically hospitalised 13 days after their first symptoms, if they're going to be hospitalised. Most aren't, of course. Thankfully, most aren't. But it tends to be about a 13-day delay from first symptoms to hospitalizations. So here I've assumed a 13-day delay. So what we see is here, people that got sick on the 17th of December with their first symptoms got sick enough to be hospitalised on the 30th of December. And on the 17th of December, there was 33,875 people who were actually diagnosed with a new infection, and that transposed into 3,218 hospitalizations. Now, we know that's not the real number. We know it's an underestimate. But the point is the ratio between these numbers is probably staying fairly constant. So what I've done is I calculated the 7 days that we have the latest data for. So we have hospitalisation data up to here. Up to here is where we have hospitalisation data for. There'll be some more coming out today, but so that's the last hospitalisation data we have. On the 5th of January, 4,066 people were hospitalised. So what I've done is I've taken the average number of new infections there, and that gives us that. And I've taken the average number of hospitalisations there, and that gives us that 3,470 over the past 10 days. And it turns out the difference between these two is 10.8, a multiplication factor of 10.8. So that number is 10 times 8, that. So if you take that number there and divide it by 10.8, you get that number. So if we take the number of new cases on the 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, all through December there, then that means that by using this multiplication factor, and I'm not saying this is going to be accurate, it's not, it's just an indication, but it shows how the increases are going to carry on. And it's inevitable it's going to carry on now. There's nothing anyone can do about this now. So potentially that would be the number of new cases reported on for the 6th. We haven't got that data yet. For the 7th, that would be artificially low because of Christmas. But then we see these high numbers of admissions are catching up after the Christmas lag. So again, we'd have to take the average of some of these numbers. But I think you can see that it's inevitable. But if that was the number of new infections on the 30th of December, that would be potentially the number of hospital admissions on the 12th of January. And these numbers are just frighteningly high for hospitalizations. And it goes on. I mean, this is potentially the number of hospitalizations on the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th of January. It just goes on throughout January with very large numbers of hospitalisations because of this 13-day delay. Now, I'm not saying that's accurate, but it does show this delay principle. So we know that hospitalisations are going to remain high for the rest of January. It is now quite inevitable because of this 13-day delay. Now let's look at what people are saying about this. So this is the next week. This is the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty. Next week's most dangerous time. This is everybody's problem. Any single unnecessary contact you have with someone is a potential risk in a chain of transmission that will lead to a vulnerable person. But of course, we don't always know who the vulnerable people are. You could be, even if you're young and fit. It's much less likely, and I do hope you're not a vulnerable person, but you can never guarantee this. We don't quite know who's going to be the vulnerable people. We know that people that are older with comorbidities are more likely, but it's not a guarantee. UK, it's 1 in 50 people have the infection at the moment, which of course is 2%. And in London, it's 1 in 30 people have the infection. And in some parts of London, it's even higher than that. So Chris Whitty is concerned about this. Now, the UK guidelines allow you to exercise with someone from another household outside, but Chris Whitty is saying even that's too dangerous at the moment. Exercise should be minimised with other people from outside your household bubble. So English hospitalisation, this is just England, over 30,000. This is very high with COVID-19. Way higher than the peak. Now, this is from Chris Whitty. He said the peak was 18,000. I think it was actually a bit higher than that, but we can see that this is way higher than it was in the previous peak on the 12th of April. Now, Chris Whitty says this: anyone who's not shocked by the number of people in hospital has not understood this at all. So if you're not shocked, Chris Whitty is saying you haven't got it. This is a bad situation. And it's in italics, so this is a direct quote from Chris Whitty. This is an appalling situation. Now this is, as I've said before, if you're watching in the States, the British, of course, tend to understate. So for a chief medical officer to use words like this is an appalling situation is remarkably strong language. Really is remarkably strong language. And this is a concerning situation. Now Essex, home counties near London, Southend Hospital, oxygen supply reached a critical situation. So the oxygen supply is very low. And of course, we know that oxygen is the difference between life and death in this infection. Now, we did notice this. It was Los Angeles County. We looked at some advice last week given to the paramedics and the first responders that they had to titrate the oxygen levels lower, that they didn't have enough oxygen to treat everyone. Now, what we normally do, if you come into hospital with an acute illness, we'll keep your oxygen, if we possibly can, between 94 and 98% saturated. That's what we normally do. So, as we know, oxygen saturation's very simple to do. Buy one of these, they're quite cheap now. It tells you what your oxygen saturations are. So my heart rate is currently 81 beats per minute. And my oxygen saturations are 98. Now, because my oxygen saturations are 99 now, in fact, okay, so my oxygen saturations are 98 or higher. What this means is if I was acutely in hospital, I wouldn't give me any supplementary oxygen because my oxygen levels are high enough. But if they went down to 96, I would titrate a poorly person's oxygen saturations. Well, I keep it between 94 and 98. So 96 would be acceptable, 95 would be acceptable. But what these guidelines are saying is that in Essex, they don't have enough oxygen to maintain at 94 to 98, which would require giving higher flow oxygen. Instead, we're happy, well, not happy, but we will tolerate it being maintained at 88 to 92. So to maintain saturations in an acutely ill person between 88 and 92, requires much less oxygen to retain it at 94 to 98. So this is one of the ways that healthcare is currently being rationed. Now, what difference does this make? Well, to tell you the truth, we don't normally think about this in hospital because these guidelines are from the British Thoracic Society. And what they say is for an acutely ill person, maintain their oxygen saturations between 94 and 98. So that's exactly what we do. Working in A&E, for example, that is exactly what we would do. We would maintain the saturations at that, unless we couldn't. But we would try hard to do that. But this is saying maintain it at 88 to 92 is now acceptable, this lower level. Now, the problem is the British Thoracic Society guidelines are evidence-based, whereas titrating oxygen saturations to 88 to 92 in an acutely ill person isn't really evidence-based. Now, do I think that will do any harm? No, I don't think it will, but we don't know because it's not based on evidence. So this is really not where we want to be at all. But am I actually concerned? Would I be alarmed, particularly if I was acutely ill and my oxygen saturations were 91, 92, 90? No, actually I wouldn't. But it's just not what we normally do. And how important it is to maintain high oxygen saturations in COVID-19, we simply don't know. Although we do know that many poorly people do have oxygen saturations which drop down. So it's just an example of how things are stretched in some parts of the country. Now, I hope this is going to be rectified soon and the oxygen supplies are replenished so that normal service can be resumed. This particular instance of lack of oxygen doesn't bother me massively, but it's not where we would like to be. And I may be wrong. Maybe this does affect the prognosis. We basically don't have the evidence to adjudicate on that. Now, Surrey, also in home counties, hospital mortuaries have reached capacity. Surrey, a badly affected county in the UK. They've got an emergency mortuary site in a local woodland with almost 200 bodies in the emergency site. This is distressing, and the deaths are probably going to carry on increasing as January goes on. Now, are the current measures working? Well, the government says reliable data on existing measures are going to be there in 10 days' time. Now, we have looked before at the COVID symptom tracker data, which is actually the most up-to-date data in the country. Let's just see if it will tell us when this data is. Yeah, this is from the 11th of January, so this is today's data. So the COVID symptom tracker data is the most up-to-date, and these dots are getting closer together. We don't see this continued exponential growth. We do see a slight levelling off, but the government are saying we won't know this for sure for another 10 days. So what we're saying is, given the new strain and the increased transmissibility of the new strain, is what we're doing now enough? Well, the government's saying they don't know. From the COVID symptom tracker data, it's looking hopeful, but we simply don't know yet. We don't know where we're going. What we know is that pressures on hospitals will carry on increasing or remain high for the rest of January, as we saw on that extrapolation I made there. We know that. We know that deaths are going to carry on remaining high because of the cases that already happened and this 13-day delay to hospitalisations. But what happens after that is going to be determined by the number of new cases, and that is looking good, but we don't actually know for sure. Now, Mr. Hancock, Matt Hancock, Health Secretary, is saying 2 million people in the UK have been vaccinated. Good. In England, there's 200,000 a day. Good. So good, relative good news from Mr. Hancock there on vaccinations. Slow start. Still not where we'd like it to be. I volunteered a week ago now and still haven't been called up to join a vaccination team. So hopefully not long now. Now, Matt Hancock's saying follow the spirit as well as the letter of the rules. Don't try and get around it. Every time you try and flex the rules, stretch the boundaries, it could be fatal for you or someone else. Staying at home is the most important thing we can do. We can do collectively as a society. So we've got the chief medical officer, we've got the senior politicians all basically agreeing And, well, for what it's worth, I'm agreeing that this is a really dangerous time. Vaccination target, 15 million by mid-February. Now, if we do 15 million by mid-February, which should be achievable, that means we'll cover all the over 70s, all the healthcare workers and everyone who's shielding. Because the over 70s come in category 3 and the shielding people come in category 3 as well. But mid-February, we're talking a good 5 weeks away. Some 600,000 invitations were sent out to people to attend vaccination centres over the weekend. So that's okay as far as it goes. Now, the vials that this vaccine is being bottled in are really quite small. So I'm just wondering why we don't use bigger vials. So why don't we put it in bigger bottles with 100 doses? Because, if you gave me a bottle with 100 doses of vaccine in, I could put that into 1 ml syringes, probably, or 100. I could probably do it in, well, not much over an hour, probably, an hour and a half, something like that. And then I'd have 100 doses ready to go, rather than using these fiddly small vials. I don't know why we don't do that. So why don't we bash it out 50 mils at a time? And then it would be much easier to prepare large numbers of syringes ready for the vaccination programme. I don't know why we don't do that. I mean, maybe not so much that it'll speed up, because there's other logistical problems as well as simply drawing it up. But I know there was a delay at one point because of the vial bottling plant at Wrexham. So putting it in bigger vials would just seem a logical way around that to me. Don't know why that's not done. If you're an executive of a pharmaceutical company, let me know. So bigger vials, why not bigger vials? Now, Nadeem Sidawi, basically he's a cabinet minister. He's been put in charge. He's the minister for vaccinations at the moment, so that's good. Don't know much about him. I know he's interested in horses, and I think he was one of the co-founders of YouGov. It's basically a marketing organisation. So it looks like Mr. Zahawi has got extreme expertise in marketing, but that doesn't necessarily transpose into logistics. So why do we always have to put politicians in charge of these things? I mean, one of the reasons that Taiwan was so effective was that the politicians didn't appear on TV. They just left it to the scientists and the experts. I mean, I would have thought that rather than appointing a politician, I'm sure Mr. Zadawi is a brilliant man. He wouldn't be in that position. But surely a brigadier or a general would have much more experience of logistics, for example. So I just don't know why we have to put politicians in charge all the time. Can't authority be delegated to outside experts? Anyway, he's the Minister for Vaccination, and of course we wish him absolutely the best. And we hope he'll do very well. Different age groups in the second wave. Now, This is something that we have been wondering about. The background here is we've been kind of thinking out loud for a few days that is this second wave caused largely by the new variant affecting younger people? Is this new variant infecting younger people and making them sicker? Well, we don't have definitive data to answer that, but we do have some things that are kind of giving us a bit of a clue. And it's looking like it's probably fairly good news on this one. So let me show you what I mean here. So this is the weekly hospitalisation rate per 100,000 for age groups. So in the green we see the over 85s, then we see, as you can see, the different age groups there. Now the gaps here, obviously many more people are hospitalised in all age groups. But the kind of gap between there and there and there and there compared to there and there in percentage terms is similar. So what we're basically saying is that we see a proportionate growth in the number of people hospitalised in the different age groups. So from this, that would intimate that this virus is not disproportionately affecting younger people. That's what this seems to be indicating. Now, different ages during the second wave, probably not, but in the recent weeks and months there's been very high rates of infection in teenagers, and we looked yesterday at the 12 to 16-year-old group that are showing a lot of cross-infection from the school situation. So teenagers, a lot of new cases lately. Student age, around 20 minus, a few years typically. Young adults. And young adults in the 20s and 30s showing a high increase. So because there's more in this age group and a small proportion of them get sick, more are getting hospitalised. So I think that's what it is. Now, we're not answering this question definitively yet. I'm not saying that this new strain of the virus is not affecting young people more. I'm not saying that. We don't have enough data for that yet, but it's looking likely that the proportions of people getting sick are the same. So it looks like this new strain of the virus is not making younger people sicker than the older strain of the virus. It's just that the numbers are higher all round, way higher all round numbers. But the gaps do seem to be proportionate. So that's, well, I suppose that's good, because I was worried about younger people getting sicker. So because there's more getting sick and hospitalised, overall pattern of serious illness and death not changing significantly. Now, this is just a report from the BBC, but it's a preliminary report, and it does make sense based on this data we've seen. But the risk of death does double with every 8 years of age. So for every 8 years older you are, risk of death doubles. And that's why we see these really high numbers in older people. And if we look at age and sex data, age and sex critically ill COVID-19 patients, September to December, again we see that men are not overrepresented in that younger age group, but thankfully the numbers there are remarkably small. But here we see more men, there we see more men getting critical illness. Men, women, way less. Men, women, women. The overall numbers in these older groups are less because the demographic is less. More people in the raters have died, so the overall numbers are less. So we see in all age groups men being affected more than women. So there we are. We see these trends in the UK, the United States. The same applies to a lot of European countries. I'm hoping to give you some more information on South Africa shortly as well. We are entering into the most difficult time of the pandemic, and we have to be really careful not to add to the cases of potential hospitalizations. Now, I was going to give you some good news now, but I've gone on a bit long. But the good news is about I'll give you on a separate video. Tocilizumab is a new drug, and it does improve survival in critically ill patients. So it is being used now in the health service. So now we have two drugs of known efficacy. We have dexamethasone and we have this tocilizumab and related drugs to in the tocilizumab group that we now know are effective. And that gives us two. It's anti-inflammatory, it's not antiviral as far as we know. So at the moment we have two drugs known to improve survivability. And that's the dexamethasone and tocilizumab. As well as that, we're giving blood thinners and antibiotics and oxygen, of course, and remdesivir as well. But that's an extra drug in the armoury for the most critically ill patients. So I'm going to leave that now. I'm going to do it separately. For now, we will say thank you for watching this video, and do stay safe and keep those around you safe as we enter it is the bleak midwinter, literally and metaphorically.